The date of January 26th as Australia Day should be changed. The 26th of January marks the beginning of policies and procedures that slowly attempted to erase the Indigenous population from existence, which began with the first fleet's arrival in 1788. The policies and procedures mark the beginning of the Aboriginal community's pain and trauma, which spanned over years and decades, affecting several generations. The assimilation policy involved an attempt of getting people to behave or act in a similar manner that over the course of time would form a one nation identity, the white Australian identity. As a result, Aboriginal people were impacted by the education and employment systems by having to adapt to the European education system, which forbid them to speak their traditional languages in an attempt to erase their cultural identity. The assimilation policy was one of many policies that encapsulated the White Australia policy, which began in 1901. The White Australia policy were a set of historical policies that aimed to claim white supremacy. Indigenous people were often refused access to community venues and services, and as a result, rather than being assimilated, they were treated inhumanely and forced to live in poverty on the fringes of towns. For the First Nations people, the 26th of January is more significant at its core. As an invasion day that disrupts the Indigenous way of life, it's a reminder that the day when the white settlers arrived and tried to integrate Aboriginal people into white society, sparking nationwide racism and robbing them of their culture, history, beliefs, and land, which defined their cultural identity. Changing the date will give them a form of reconciliation toward Indigenous people, as it recognises the meaning behind the day that marked the beginning of pain and trauma for several years to follow. As stated, for Aboriginal Australians, January 26th holds the violent and traumatic legacy of colonisation and acts as a conduit for past trauma to the present. Changing the date will be a symbolic act of accountability and a massive step toward reconciliation. Reconciliation is about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous peoples for the benefit of all Australians. Reconciliation Australia bases such a vision on 5 living, interrelated dimensions, all of which Change the Date will champion. The first is race relations, with a goal of positive two-way relationships based on trust and respect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Changing the Date works to overcome broken trust and respect by addressing the genesis of the issue, the beginning of colonisation, and actioning change. Secondly is equality and equity. Changing the date will provide all Australians the opportunity to celebrate their homeland on a date that is equally recognised as positively significant and meaningful. The third is institutional integrity. This goal is defined as ushering our political, business and community institutions to actively support all dimensions of reconciliation. Government and corporate-led initiatives to support the Change the Date will have a massive systematic impact on reconciliation at a macro level. Fourth is historical acceptance. There is truth, justice and healing within historical acceptance. Change the Date is a symbolic act of acknowledgement of Australia's true history and is thus a significant step in strengthening reconciliation. Finally, there is unity. The definition of unity here is that Indigenous histories, cultures and rights are valued and recognised as incorporating a shared national identity. Changing the date is fundamental to actioning this goal and achieving a true national identity. The domain of unity with reconciliation works as a summary of the symbolic importance of changing the date. Thus, changing the date will significantly and historically strengthen the charge toward reconciliation. There are 365 days in a year which can be used to celebrate Australia Day. On Australia Day, Australians celebrate the land that we live on, the opportunities that we have as Australians and the achievements that we have made as a nation. The government describes Australia Day as an opportunity to unite Australia's diverse population. Although celebrating Australia Day on January 26 counteracts the government's claims, whilst being insensitive to Indigenous Australians. Jan 26 marks the beginning of massacres, land theft, stolen generations, and the beginning of a life of disadvantage for Indigenous Australians. Therefore, January 26 should not be celebrated as Australia Day. There are many other days that could be considered more respectful for all Australians, whilst also more significant to the actual achievements that have been made as a nation. First, National Sorry Day, 26th of May, also known as National Day of Healing, acknowledges the mistreatment of Indigenous Australians and was a huge step for reconciliation as a united nation. Secondly, in 1915, Australia Day was celebrated on the 30th of July. This day has had no negative impact on other cultures, unlike the current Australia Day date. The United Nations in 2011 claimed the 30th of July as the International Day of Friendship, which celebrates resolving conflicts between cultures, countries and people. Australia Day continues to work toward an inclusive country, and this date could continue to encourage reconciliation. January 1st recognises when the Commonwealth of Australia and the United Nations was created. It also can encourage promoting a new year as a more inclusive Australia. Changing the date will impact many Australians and the nation in a positive way. If the date of Australia Day is changed, Australia will demonstrate the diverse range of cultures that are celebrated on this day. Australia will successfully unite the Australian population to be a more inclusive country. January 26 needs to be about learning, respect and reconciliation of the history of Indigenous Australians. Therefore, if Australia Day is changed to a different date, such as 26th of May, 30th of July or 1st of Jan, people will come together on January 26 to reflect on Indigenous history and reconciliation for the future.